This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to episode 104 of the Inktofilm podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week, we discuss Tommy Lee Wallace's 1990 miniseries, It. Okay, so I think the question on everyone's minds, I think we're going to talk about that right here at the top. Let's talk about Tim Curry as Pennywise. I want to know just what you thought from the get-go.
Wow. Yeah, hit me with the big question. So I'm going to preface my statements a little bit by saying this miniseries I know is beloved by people. This was a primetime audience that you could just watch on ABC, and people were able to watch this kind of horror, and I think it was almost traumatizing. It was so beyond what you could see normally on this kind of television. And so I think this really holds a special sort of like nostalgic / that like early childhood fear that is so linked to what it is that I think it's really appropriate, right? That we have this old version that a lot of people look back on fondly. All that being said, and like with all due respect, I just wasn't really that frightened by it. I think maybe my familiarity with the material is affecting that. Also, it felt sanitized from what we get in the book, which is a much darker, gorier, more adult version of this story. So all that being said, I like Tim Curry as Pennywise. He was working with limitations that obviously Skarsgård doesn't have these days with modern technology. And he brings a lot to the performance in a fairly small amount of screen time. So I would say I recognize what people love about it. I think it was good. But for me, it just doesn't land as some sort of iconic thing that I'm going to look back on and go, oh my God, can you believe how Tim Curry was as Pennywise? It didn't hit me that way. Now, I'm really curious. Do you disagree with that? Did you find something different in it?
I do disagree, actually, yeah.
Okay.
I
That's
was
probably
shocked.
good.
I was shocked at how much I liked his performance. I think that ultimately was what it came down to. I was like you said, limitations. It's a television movie or miniseries, so it's the 1990s technology wise. I was just really surprised at how genuinely like creepy, like it reminds me of like somebody preying on children. It's maybe not as scary and otherworldly and monstrous as something we get in the book, but there is something really creepy about the clown that preys on children. And the way that he does it, and even the Georgie scene, the early Georgie scene, I was really, really happy with. But I do also recognize that it's a different type of performance than something like Bill Skarsgård. I think I prefer the Bill Skarsgård Pennywise, but I think that the performance is easily my favorite part of this miniseries.
Yeah, well, I agree with that too. I mean, this was... there's a lot of cheese in this miniseries. I think they really tried to make it sort of like easily consumable for large audiences in the 1990. Yeah. So it's not going to be as dark as some of the like horror movies we're getting of the time. This is a silver screen kind of deal. So I think you have to keep that in perspective when you're comparing that to a rated R, big budget film that we're getting these days.
I was surprised you were just kind of talking about it, but the broad and very over-the-top performances that we were getting in this. Because I was expecting, there's just not a lot of subtlety, especially in the adult characters, I would say. The adults are like really going for it in a major way, and I feel like there was maybe some direction to be given to be like, let's bring it in a little bit. I think people, don't think that audiences won't be able to follow you unless you're shouting your feelings and like emoting in such like extreme ways. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about how this was it's not very nostalgic for people. It was a big deal for the time. Part 1, when it aired, was the 5th highest rated program on Sunday, November 18th, with an 18.5 rating and watched in 17.5 million households. Part 2, the 2nd highest rated program on Tuesday, November 20th, with a 20.6 rating and watched in 19.2 million households.
Wow. How about that? So that's a big deal.
And you can see like the first part really brought people in as well. Like there was that word of mouth that was going around and people were really into this.
Well, I remember because like, you know, I was born in 85 and I remember people talking about this when I was a little kid. And it was like, it was a little bit too advanced for me. So I think I was shielded from it a little bit. Like we weren't like, you got to see this. I was a little bit young. But I remember, like, you know, even when I was getting into elementary school, people would talk about it. And it was like in hushed tones because it was this crazy thing. And some people were referring to the book because some people got their hands on the book at an early age and read it. But I think a lot of people were referring to this miniseries and how terrifying it was. And Tim Curry was the stuff of nightmares. And I can see all of that. You know what I mean? And I guess it's like I'm of two minds because I have like my modern perspective of someone who's read the books 2 times now and seen the film and the new film, and then now seen this. And so I feel like I'm very steeped in it. I even went back and I started listening to our old episodes again. I mentioned this earlier to you. I listened to, I think, like 3 of our early episodes, and I plan to continue the series until I've listened to the first 6 episodes we ever did, all in prep of It Chapter 2 coming out, which we should talk about. I'm very excited for, and I know you probably are too.
Yeah, I can't wait. I have also been listening. I've only listened to our first episode so far, but I plan to listen to the rest of our coverage to kind of refresh and just to, you know, I'm really nostalgic for us of 2 years ago talking about it, and I don't know, it's really funny to hear us in those early episodes.
Yeah, I mean, nostalgic's the right way to put it. It's weird because I guess it was only 2 years ago, but in other ways, like it was 2 years ago, and it was the start of this podcast, and those episodes definitely, there's like a rawness to them that I appreciate. A lot of us not really knowing how to do the thing that we're trying to do, and we're just learning on the fly. And you can kind of hear that in the episodes. And
yeah,
it's kind of fascinating to me to go back and listen to it for that reason.
Yeah, and I think we've both gained some confidence with like articulating and like really drilling down to what we want to say. In those early episodes, we were like you said, we were raw.
Well, that's to be expected. It was our first time ever doing it.
Yeah, there's something nice about it. So yeah, fun to go back to.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny. So if you think about how that parallels the story of It. We have our early years, right, where we're innocent and we're being faced with the huge prospect of podcasting, and now we're returning 2 years later to face it again. I don't know. I think it's kind of funny.
Well, speaking of parallels and Pennywise potentially, you know, us returning to battle, when during our first project, way back in 2017. Right as we were starting the podcast, I believe I was editing the 5th episode or the film episode. I believe it was the 5th episode though. A hurricane was hitting Florida where I was in Orlando. We moved into a hotel room so that, because my girlfriend works in a hotel, so she has to work during the storm. So I was editing in a hotel room, and wouldn't you know it, 2 years later, and that was right as the first It film was coming out, Chapter 1. Wouldn't you know it, 2 years later, It Chapter 2 is coming around, and I'm back in a hotel room. There's another hurricane coming around. Is it Pennywise, or does it just happen to be September in Florida?
Yeah, that I think you even recorded an episode from the hotel. I might be wrong about that, but I have some vague memory of that even happening. So that's kind of spooky, honestly, that would come full circle like that.
The year in between, the year that we didn't cover it, there was no hurricane that hit Florida. So
there you go.
I think it's Pennywise, like trying to stop us, trying to put fear into us.
We have to talk a little bit. I know we're covering the miniseries here, but like, where are you at with Chapter 2 and your excitement level and like watching trailers and all that?
I mean, I haven't watched a trailer since the one that you and I watched together
on our Patreon episode.
Episode. Other than that, I mean, I'm just getting excited. I'm starting to see like interviews with the cast and things like that they start to do for promotional material, and just I mean, revisiting this stuff and watching the miniseries now, I'm like, how are we going to get a massive, crazy, weird spider?
Yeah. I think looking at how they did the first movie, I would suspect they're probably going to do some sort of like hint or homage or like nod in the direction of a spider, and then they're going to do something different, because that's kind of how they did everything here.
What would you do if there was like a hint homage to the actual, like a frame of this film, of this spider in that film?
Well, I'd lose it. I don't think it'd be a good idea, but I think it'd be funny. Yeah, just for where I'm at with chapter 2 is I'm realizing that I can't tell if I'm actually going to be able to be fully objective watching this movie, because subjectively, like, I feel such nostalgia for this project. I am so excited to see it again. Whenever I see the trailers in the theater, like I think I saw them IMAX recently, it just looks so amazing. Like the sound is so good. When I hear it, it just makes me happy. It's such a weird project to have that feeling towards, because it's so like dark childhood trauma based film and book, but I just do, and I'm so excited for it, and I think I'm gonna love it. I think I love the idea of like a very long. I think it's well over 2 hours film that when you combine that with the first one, it's going to actually in total runtime be longer than this miniseries was. I don't know. I'm really excited for it.
This miniseries has got some length to it. This miniseries is like 3 hours, and it feels it sometimes. Yeah,
that's true. So let's shift focus back towards the miniseries here. We have a cast of children that I don't know. I feel like historically on this podcast, I've said that children performers can be very hit or miss, and it's like you can tell that they're learning how to act still, and often things will kind of fall flat. I think it's really demands a special touch from like the director in order to get the performances that you need, and being able to recognize when it's not working and maybe change the scene to make it work or whatever you got to do. And I felt like that was kind of lacking in this film, as much as you were talking about the adults, not across the board, not everywhere, but like Bill, I just didn't think his performance was particularly convincing. It seemed like a kid who was putting on a stutter for the camera, which obviously he is, but like it, the acting is all about the illusion and convincing you, and I wasn't convinced, and that kind of held true with a lot of the characters. So overall, I don't know. Do you want to talk about like how these children compared to our children actors that we get in the film? We do have a young Seth Green, which I should shout out.
In the new film, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Seth Green. When I saw him, I was like, "Holy shit, he's in this!" It's so weird.
It is.
I had no idea. I had no idea.
And then the adult he supposedly grows into is funny, because it's like looks nothing like Seth Green now.
Yeah. I think the best way for me to describe this stuff, like comparing the children, we haven't seen the adults yet in the new one in part 2, so we can't really compare that yet. But just overall, I think that although I had fun watching it, it's very clearly like it kind of missed the mark in terms of like adapting Stephen King's work. I think that like the child actors, although at some points are like raw, like you would like a child actor to be, in some ways just like completely didn't work. Things felt really forced, like you're saying, a lot of the time. But I have to say,
any particular moments that you would give an example of that?
Every time he said "Hi-Ho Silver," I was like, "This is so cringy." Stop saying it. It just doesn't. And some things just don't come off the page right. And I think that has to do with like the person who's adapting it. But there are also times when you need to tweak things to make it more adaptable. We've talked about that a ton on this podcast.
You're totally right, man, and that's, I think, like a really key observation for adaptation, because in most ways, this miniseries is actually more accurate or more faithful to the book. Now, it omits and it sanitizes a lot, but as far as like what actually is on screen, most of it is right out of the novel. And what you just mentioned, like sometimes it doesn't make the jump from page to screen that well, and sometimes it needs to be reimagined.
Yeah, but I do have to say that when those kids were together, there were moments of like almost like a Stand By Me feeling. Like when they're throwing the rocks together and standing up to Henry Bowers, I felt was actually like a pretty solid moment for that film, for this miniseries, because it was, I would say, a highlight in this miniseries, and I thought that the kids worked much better than the adults. The adults to me were just like, the guy who played Bill was like completely miscast in my opinion.
Yes, yeah, I mean that little ponytail, and he had quite a look to him.
The reveal of that ponytail, by the way, was one of the most shocking moments of this entire film. He enters the room. We see him from the front. He enters the room and sits down, and like into frame comes the ponytail. I was like, whoa.
I mean, it was a look. It was a choice.
Yeah, there's a lot of mullets and things like that in this as well. So,
yeah, I think as far as the adults go, I think adult Ben Hanscom is one of the better. I think that's
yeah, John Ritter.
Right, John Ritter. Yeah, I think that was one of the better adult performances, and it led to one of my absolute favorite scenes in the entire miniseries, which is the moment where he is making out with adult Beverly and thinks that she has recognized the poem for what it is, and then all of a sudden he realizes he has like makeup on his face, and then you see the clown legs, and then he pulls back and it's Pennywise, and like that's probably my favorite moment of Pennywise from this entire miniseries. So good, so surprising. And then just like that sort of stomach churning moment of like he's been making out with this, elder god demon that is in this
Spider,
movie,
yeah.
Which they leave out a lot of that from the movie, but we know from the books that's what's going on.
Something else I just like in doing research and prepping for this episode, something else I totally forgot about was that Pennywise, in terms of like what we find out, Pennywise was pregnant. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember smashing some eggs in the book, right?
Yeah, so it's like, so that's something else that I didn't even think about, was that like there was that kind of like lingering thing, like is there going to be another Pennywise, another demon thing spawned from this one?
Yeah, you're right. I think if I had gotten to our 5th episode, I would have been more reminded of that. But yeah, that is something that I wonder if we'll see a resurfacing of that in the new film. That's something to keep an eye out for.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Pennywise, because I think we were so into the like micro moment to moment in those early chapters that I don't know how often, maybe we did, I don't know how often we were able to step back and really talk about Pennywise as a monster, as a villain, as the antagonist for this story. And I just want to get your thoughts on it. I have some stuff I've been thinking about. How do you feel like Pennywise fits into what Stephen King is trying to say about childhood and everything else in this book and in this miniseries?
I mean, overall, I always found the idea of Pennywise to be preying on fear, and specifically like the fear giving him his power was something that I really liked. And then in terms of like what it means to the children and like what he represents maybe as like a force, if there wasn't a monster, what does Pennywise represent to these children? It's like maybe growing up and like the fear of the unknown, and the fear of, because he is the unknown, you know what I mean? They're afraid of something they can't comprehend. And so maybe that idea of like growing up and becoming adults and forgetting where you came from, forgetting your childhood, forgetting all of these things because of growing up. I think it's a lot of that, a lot of like being built in, like what made you what you are today, and like kind of not forgetting those kinds of things and not forgetting the lessons, and maybe not being afraid going forward of the unknown.
Yeah, I mean that's to look at it in a positive light, but if you flip that on its head and like not being able to escape the childhood traumas and having to still wrestle with it as an adult, right? Mm-hmm. And what he represents. Yeah, I mean I want to dial into that a little more. I think you're right on it there, but Pennywise is a clown as his like main form. Like he obviously can take other forms and he can do other things, but that's his go-to form. And I think it's interesting to think about why that is. So when you're a child, I remember the first, like, I don't know the first moment, but I have like a vague memory of like the first time I was around a clown and it flipped from being, there's like a moment where it flips from being like, oh, this is a cool, like lovable figure, to I just realized that this is a man and he has makeup on and he's acting in a way that is clearly not real. He's like putting on an act.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden I'm creeped out.
Right.
And there's that moment. It's like a chill moment that you get when you see that. And that only really works on you as a child, where you're still able to believe that there is such a thing as a clown or as a Santa Claus or as, you know what I mean? Like some sort of supernatural figure that is just going to make you balloons and be fun. And as a kid, like the first moment where that happens is terrifying. I'm thinking of, there's like a YouTube video where there's these kids who, there's like an Easter bunny coming out of the car, and they're like, oh, here comes the Easter bunny, kids. And then you look at the Easter bunny, it's got some like really bizarre looking costume. And then all of a sudden the kids go, that's not the Easter bunny. And they start screaming and running around. It was like this viral video, right?
Yeah.
And that's like that moment I feel like all kids have with clowns at some point in their life, where they realize that there's like, this clown isn't like quote unquote a clown. It's a person, and it's creepy. And so that he embodies that moment in like everything he does. Like he looks on the surface like something fun, you maybe, but you know that underneath it's something much darker. And it's also unknown, like you said, because their face is covered and you can't see their real face. So in that sense, like a clown is the perfect symbol for that idea. And the idea, I think, is also clearly linked to, we talked about this a lot in our coverage, childhood. Like all the kids are faced with extremely adult problems, and they are not given the help they need because the adults look at them and think they shouldn't be dealing with those problems. So the adults the adults want to pretend like they don't have to deal with it. And that is embodied through like early childhood sexuality, the violence that they are subject to, bullying in the form of Henry Bowers. And Henry Bowers, once again, the book version is a way darker, more sadistic and terrifying figure than he is in the miniseries. In the miniseries, I felt like he was kind of laughable at times. There's even like, they kind of are able to get the best of him a lot, and they call him like the Three Stooges, and he kind of feels like that. And he doesn't actually cut Ben. I don't know. There's just like certain things that were kind of scrubbed clean for it that makes him less of a threat. But if you go back to the book, he is truly dark and truly scary. And all of that wrapped up into a metaphor that is larger than all of those combined parts is Pennywise, because he is like the ultimate childhood bully too. The idea that children are faced with this creature is something that is so far beyond what they should be having to deal with at that age. And the noticeably the adults don't even recognize it. They often don't even see Pennywise's effect, much like adults are often blind to childhood trauma. And so, I don't know, just the more I was thinking about that, the more it's like it all lines up, and I think it's really masterfully done and specifically chosen by King. And I think that's one of the reasons that we see Pennywise as like this iconic horror villain that is like lasting. And then, of course, you take that to the adulthood too, of like, and I'm really going to be curious to see how they deal with this in the chapter 2, of the idea of like, okay, if that's childhood trauma, you don't escape it, and it's still part of you as an adult. And in fact, sometimes it rears its head again, and you have to deal with it head on. And that's what we're going to see in chapter 2. So I think it all holds up, and it all works well.
Yeah. Do you remember any? I'm just thinking of like Pennywise and like what it means for like Stephen King's like macroverse and everything that goes on from there. Right. Do you draw anything with that? Like, what do you think of like this like being that's so large and looming? What is it that, like, I mean, I guess we've talked about it's the fear of children and it's so tasty and that's what he wants. What do you think it means? Like, what does it represent beyond that? Like, is there anything like larger than maybe like the goings on of like each individual person, like something bigger than that?
He seems like an id, sort of like in a psychology point of view. Like he's like an id run wild. Like he's hungry. He has all these like urges. He needs attention. He needs people to, be afraid of him. And he's sort of, in that sense, like just like a runaway child himself. And I know that's a point that's been made elsewhere, that Pennywise is sort of a childlike figure, even though he's this elder god. And I think that's true in a lot of ways. And it's because when you look at children when they're young, like they often have no impulse control. And that's why you see sometimes bullying can be so scary. It's because they don't realize the harm they can cause. Because a lot of times when you're a child, you haven't developed empathy yet. And if you look at all of that, like that's kind of Pennywise in a nutshell. Like he is the elder god version of that. Like he doesn't view people as something that to empathize with. They're just objects to him. Or I should say it. And yeah, I think in the elder god sense, I don't know about macroverse stuff because I haven't read like Dark Tower. I haven't read a lot of these novels that delve more deeply into it. The only thing I can think of is that as a standalone issue, childhood trauma is not something new. And maybe it's taken on new guises, in the modern world, but like that's been going on forever. And in fact, was probably much worse, throughout history. And so I think it's interesting to think about that as you look at Pennywise throughout time, and how we hear stories of the black spot and the settlers disappearing and all this stuff. Like, it's really bad. And like the axe murders in the book. And like, I think it's interesting to think of like this god that's been around forever and causing these problems, because in a way, like, childhood trauma has always been a part of life, and it's always been really, really serious.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think that's definitely touching on it. I'm going to be interested to see like what they are able to, because I feel like as much as I love the new adaptation as well, I don't think they really went into some of the like, some of that bigger, larger, whatever, supernatural stuff. Like, they say it was clearly supernatural, but it didn't go like that crazy Cthulhu creatures and like the turtle. Was there even a turtle moment in the movie? In the movie, they mentioned the turtle. Right.
Remember, they see that there's like, there's a turtle when they're swimming, and then there's like turtle wax and a couple different nods to the turtle. But no, we don't get like a big turtle moment. That's one of those things I don't know how well that would actually translate to the screen, like we've talked about.
That's why I wonder like what we're getting out of chapter 2, because the end of chapter 2 ends up being even, I think, more than that. It is very like, it goes really weird with the spider and like all this other stuff.
The end of the miniseries.
Well, yeah, but I just mean like going into chapter 2, like what is that going to look like?
Yeah.
Because
that's a good point. So in the book, he's this massive spider, and I put that in quotations because it was actually more than a spider. It was something else, and it was something spider-like.
Yeah.
And I like the idea that you can take that and reinterpret it, and I think they kind of did in chapter 1, in that they had... Remember the scene where all the children are like floating and sort of like hovering in the air? Mm-hmm. It's almost like they were caught in a web.
Right.
And so I think they're doing some nods like that. And in fact, I think they might be pushing it more Lovecraftian, because, think about the moment where Pennywise is holding Beverly and he opens up his face, and inside there you see, this is like the one moment of the Deadlights.
Right.
I am hoping we're going to get more Deadlights.
Yeah.
In chapter 2. And more Lovecraftian stuff. And I like the idea of pushing that to more cosmic horror places, and I hope they do, even though it's a very difficult thing to do on film. I hope they try, because that was one thing I actually really liked about the miniseries. To get back to that, in the sewers of the moments where the Deadlights came for them, and it was just this like light in a tunnel that would like grab one of the bullies and pull him, like the way like that one bully folded over and got pulled into the pipe, like that was disturbing. And sometimes in some ways even scarier than some of the clown stuff, because it was so like indescribable, I guess.
Yeah.
And the idea of a horrific light that dazzles you and turns your hair white in a moment because it's shown you some terrifying truth of the universe, I imagine.
Yeah.
That all worked pretty well in the miniseries, and I hope we get a touch of that.
Yeah. That's the kind of stuff I wonder. I would love to see like what, I don't know. I'm interested to see like what Muschietti brings to that kind of otherworldly stuff. But I think we should get into the miniseries a little more and just talk about like some of the specifics. Did you have like a least favorite part? Did you have a part that you wish wasn't in it, that like didn't do anything for you?
There's a couple of moments that I just found. Okay, one of them in particular was the bizarre bike riding scene between Mike and Bill. There's like a montage of them just like having a blast on this bike.
I also thought you were talking about at the very end where he's just like riding around in the streets and like trying to get his wife to come back.
I mean, that didn't work very well, but at least that's from the book.
Right.
Mostly, I think. No, I'm talking about when Mike and Bill, in the middle of all the stuff that's going on, have this like, I don't know, 45-second to a minute montage of them just laughing, two adult men riding on this bike, having a great time, slapping each other on the back. It was a goofy. It was set to this like really upbeat 90s music. Mm-hmm. It felt like it was from like a sitcom or something. It was very odd. There was a few moments of that where it was like that buddy feeling that they were trying to establish between the adults in the restaurant. They had that
exactly,
for a bit.
Yeah. I will say with the restaurant though, I was really into some of this, like some of the special effects that they went for. I think there was a lot of effort put into this, and I do appreciate it for that reason, because each of the little fortune cookie moment, like things that happened, that was pretty awesome. Like the eyeball and the baby bird, whatever it was.
That was all from the book too, man. I think all of those details were exactly so someone really set out to be like, I'm going to capture a lot of the scenes from the book,
right? And
exactly.
I think it's mostly in the screenplay, because Tommy Lee Wallace has said that before filming this, he hadn't read the book, and then after filming it and after releasing the miniseries, he went back and read it, and he says that he feels like they missed the mark. He feels like there was a lot more that they could have gotten into.
Interesting. So I assume the screenwriter had read the book, whoever did the adaptation.
Yes.
Itself, but he as a director had not read it.
Right.
That's I think that's kind of a mistake, and unless you're really trying to distance yourself from something for some reason.
Well, like
go read the book,
Annihilation, Alex Garland was the kind of a similar situation. He said like he
read it once though. That was different. Yeah. But he read it once, and then he didn't reread it. He only went off of his memory of the book, which I actually think is kind of a fascinating way to go about it.
Yeah.
But to not read it at all, I don't know. I don't know if I would recommend that for people if they're thinking of adapting something. Like, you gotta read it yourself and know what you're working with.
Yeah. Another part that really worked for me, that I find actually probably the creepiest part of the movie, is there's the two blood scenes. The scene where Bill goes and opens up the book, and Georgie's photo starts like bleeding, and then his parents come in and they can't see the blood, and they like place the book back on the shelf. And then the other one with Beverly and her father. Yeah. She's in the bathroom, and the balloon bursts, and there's blood everywhere, and he comes in and like rubs her face with the blood on his way out, all that stuff.
Yeah,
I think all that worked, and like a lot of that is from the book as well. But I think it looked good on screen. Like I think they were able to adapt those moments and make them like legitimately creepy.
There was a third blood scene, which I thought was kind of funny, and it was the library scene where the balloons kept popping and exploding blood onto people.
Yeah.
And what's hilarious about it is if you watch it closely, like every single actor flinches when it happens, even though they're not supposed to be noticing it, but they can't. So every single time they have this like huge flinch when it pops. I don't know, it's funny. But yeah, I mean, that was good. And in fact, that was another standout moment for me. I should mention where the library Pennywise, where especially when he was like Richie was trying to talk to the librarian at the end of it, and Pennywise is just like clowning around behind him, hanging over the railing and doing the noisemaker and like spinning that. And those were the moments where like it seemed like Tim Curry was really going for it. That stood out as some of the best stuff, I think. And
I love Tim Curry for that, because like think about how forgettable this film would have been, or this miniseries would have been, without Tim Curry going absolute like balls to the wall, and just like he goes so crazy and so huge in the same way that the actors were going very, very like large with their emotions and those kinds of things. They weren't the characters to do it, and Tim Curry going large and going crazy really, really worked for Pennywise as a character. And like all of those moments have turned into like GIFs now and memes and everything. Did you have I got a funny moment. How about the moment where I think it's Stan is in the shower, and like the shower things are like the rods are like coming out and like chasing him around the bathroom? Like that was so bonkers. And so crazy, and then Pennywise like comes out of the ground and like bursts through the ground.
I mean, I think that was a scene. I mean, I guess I can see how it's funny too, but I actually really liked that scene because it felt like that reality bending that we get more of in the book, where Pennywise, it shows how powerful this being is. It's not just an entity that can be contained. It can also literally change reality in front of you. And that makes it, I mean, that's something that really works with Pennywise too, is that he's omnipresent in Derry. You can't escape it. And like Pennywise is at the dinner in the fortune cookies. It's everywhere, and that sort of inescapable nature is really frightening. The idea that like if you're in Derry, at least you're not getting away from it.
Yeah, I just realized I haven't.
You're in its web, so to speak.
I like it. I just realized I haven't really spoken much about Tommy Lee Wallace. I just want to mention because he is the director of this miniseries. He's an American director, writer, producer, and actor. Although having worked in diverse genres, Tommy is probably best known for his contribution to horror films, most notably many sequels. Early on, he scripted Amityville 2, The Possession, and quickly moved on to both write and direct the John Carpenter-related Halloween 3. Have you seen Halloween 3?
Maybe? Which one's Halloween 3?
That's the one that Michael Myers is in. It's like the witch cult thing.
No, actually, I don't think I have seen it.
Okay, it's bonkers. And so he directed this.
Okay.
Which is kind of... I mean, I know there's people who love Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, so... it's very, like, cult... I don't know, has a cult following. He also directed Fright Night Part 2 and It, which we are now talking about.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. I mean, I can see that he's got a certain flair that works for things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this is his first TV movie or like miniseries or anything like that. So I think the transition from film to TV and like back then especially like the budget that you're being offered and things like that, the things you're able to actually do on film. I know he was frustrated with that, with like there were so like the final scene, it was storyboarded a certain way and just based on budget and time and things like that, he was really unhappy with the ending with the spider stuff. They had like a small model of it where it was much more bulky, I guess, instead of being so like spindly and like skinny. And when they mocked it up to full scale, it ended up being really skinny, and just a lot of the fight there at the end didn't end up how he wanted it to. So
it looked real hokey, but
yeah.
I was able to forgive it a little bit because I assume it was budget limitation / technology at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a few scenes I just want to touch on in moments. For one, I think my disappointment with Henry Bowers continued into adulthood. Henry Bowers, the adult, wasn't very frightening to me. He was more pathetic than anything else, which you could argue he's pretty pathetic in the book too. But I don't know. It seemed like even Pennywise didn't really take him seriously, and it was like, "Oh, come on, dummy, come do this thing for me."
In the book, when Pennywise gets a hold of Henry, you're legitimately like worried and you know that the characters are going to be intimidated when they come up against him. And he seems like he's like a force to be like, and this guy was kind of just like an older gentleman who's like, maybe not a gentleman, but he's an older guy who's like coming to get them, and like he's going to have to be sneaky and like stab him out of nowhere.
Somehow seem much older than the rest of our characters, which I know his hair turned white and stuff, but
right,
seemed much older.
Yeah, so like I just remember like reading the book and being like, oh shit, like it's gonna go down with Henry Bowers. And then here in this miniseries, it was very like kind of just, it was, I think they had it in here because it was in the book and they were trying to do everything as faithfully as possible. Well,
in the book, it was pointed out that like there was a few times where Pennywise was trying to affect them, and it seemed like the Losers Club was getting the better of it, and so Pennywise goes to Henry because Henry can do things beyond, like, you don't have to believe in Henry Bowers for him to be able to hurt you. And so Pennywise is able to use that. And then the other thing that gets dropped, I think, is the Tom Rogan stuff. Tom Rogan never shows up later either. So these like real world bullies, think about the two more bullies we're bringing back. And we don't really get that. I don't know. So a lot of the teeth of that in the adults is omitted here. And I hope we get more of that in chapter 2.
Yeah, I think we definitely will. It was set up. It was definitely set up in the first part of the Andy Muschietti film.
What about that moment where when Henry Bowers is escaping and the Pennywise turns into a dog head?
Yeah,
it's just like a very brief. Like, it cuts away immediately because it looks so bad, I think. But it's clearly like a dog just like sticking its head through a costume.
Yeah,
like normal sized dog. That's again like that's lifted right out of the book. But
exactly.
Like, in the book, it has the head of like a Doberman, and just imagining a clown suit with the head of a Doberman is terrifying in a book. But you try and put that on the screen with a real dog, it's gonna look real silly. And it does.
Yeah. And I think that's just what it comes down to, is they're like things that they wanted to be specifically adapted from the book. And they're like, this has to be in the film because it was in the book. And then, yeah, when push came to shove, it's just about actually getting it done. Would have taken a lot of more resources, I guess, dedicated to those specific moments if you wanted them to look good back then.
And that guard was still named Kuntz, by the way, which I still wonder. We've never gotten feedback to that account, but I wonder if there is something to be said for King naming that guard Kuntz, and if that was some sort of takedown of Dean Koontz, his contemporary horror writer.
I think at this point, it's got to be, right? It might not have even been necessarily quite a takedown as much as it was like a... You think it was a takedown?
I think they were competing back then more than they are. I mean, I think King has gone on to really solidify his legacy in a way that Koontz hasn't, but I think at the time there was a lot of people who would argue between who's better and that sort of thing. I don't know. I'd just be curious to know if anyone's ever been able to find out from King if that was any sort of intentional thing or completely accidental.
Yeah.
Koontz is such a unique name. It just feels like it's probably not accidental. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. How about Beverly doing the old no-look shot at the spider at the end? I really got to hit this time, so I'm going to hide my eyes. I mean, looking away from the deadlights, I get it, but just this blind no-look faith shot, I guess.
Yeah.
And nailing that carapace. I don't know. That moment got so over the top that it kind of was hard to take it seriously. And I think that's one of the limitations of this movie in general, is that I was struggling to take it seriously. Right.
Especially, and like I was saying, for whatever reason, that first half works better for me. It just does. And the second half just I don't know if it had to do with they shot it later and the budget ran out or what it was, but it just seemed like they were all right, now we have all the adults together and they're in a library. And then now they're in a restaurant. And then now let's put them in the sewer. And then it's the end of the movie. And, we're seeing flashes between them and everything. And we see them in different locations. But it just felt like I don't know. I didn't connect with any of the adults as characters, really. But I do want to ask you how you felt, because we were just talking about Bev. How did the assault work for you in this film, in the miniseries?
Which assault?
When she's trying to get away from her boyfriend or whoever it is.
Oh, Tom, it is Tom. It's just a different Tom Rogan, I think. He's sort of an 80s cokehead asshole instead of your more classic sort of abusive boyfriend that he is in the book, or husband. I don't know. I think they are married. I can't remember. Anyway, I think the throwing of the perfume and stuff, I think they do a good job of sort of setting that up as a parallel to the rock throwing scene. Mm-hmm. And it works for that way. It was kind of cheesy the way it was shot, where it was it would do a very close up of it bouncing off of his knee, and then he'd go and fall over. But you could tell that it was very staged shot. There was a little bit of that, but it worked overall. I think it's a sanitized version once again. When you start stripping away all of the darker elements to these scenes, I don't know, they kind of lose their teeth in a way.
Does it feel disrespectful when they lose their teeth? Does it feel like you're saying you're just trying to hit plot points?
Disrespectful to what?
Just basically saying okay, she's been a victim of abuse, and they're just trying to say that and then brush over it so that, and not deal with it really, and just have that be part of her character? Or do you think that it's
it feels like they're not engaging with it fully in the way that King does, for better or for worse. Whether or not we talked about that section is troubling. And, there's a lot of troubling stuff in that book, and, whether or not you think it's appropriate or that King should even be touching on these subjects, that's up to the individual reader to decide. But at the very least, you can say that he gives it an unflinching look, and we get Tom Rogan's point of view. We get into his mind, and it's terrifying. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of that fear, a lot of that darkness is kind of omitted from this. And part of it's for time, which, oh, by the way, I don't know if you saw this in your research, but I heard that this was originally intended to be a full TV series, and then they ended up having to condense it down to this 2-part miniseries.
No, I didn't see that, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah. I don't know how far along into the production before that was changed. But apparently there are a few fragments of it left where there was dangling story threads being set up that seemed like it was going to be more of a ongoing TV series thing, and instead they just dropped it.
I wonder what because that's interesting to me. I think they could have worked pretty well. I think it would have worked better than the miniseries in this case if you had it a little, because it's very long. You can kind of get away with that more if there's multiple episodes, but because it's 2 parts here, a lot of it feels like when they're, I mean, like we've talked about, a lot of it is just like straight up from the book, dialogue from the book, moments from the book, all being put together. But some of it, just pacing wise, it just feels really slow and really like it feels like nothing's going on.
Yeah, it's interesting. And that kind of shows like the trouble of adapting this material, right? Because it's such a massive novel. It's probably, I think it is longer than all 3 Lord of the Rings books combined. You know what I mean? It's a huge novel, and they're trying to put it into one project of any kind is going to be tough. So you have to split it out. And I'm kind of surprised it hasn't been attempted to make it into like more of a TV series, traditional. But when it's all said and done, the rumor is that there's going to be a final director's cut, special cut of it chapter 1 and 2 put together, maybe in a fashion that's more similar to the book, unconfirmed. But the combined total is going to be over 5 hours long, that's like a season of television right there.
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome. I hope that'd be really cool to see a cut that's like very similar to the book, back and forth.
I'd absolutely watch that. I'd watch the hell out of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Also budgetary, I think problems make it so that we don't see as much of Pennywise affecting the town and affecting, like, we see him, kill a couple, or off screen obviously, but it's implied, kill a couple children early on. But beyond that, we're not seeing the like terrorizing of these children. We don't really hear anything about what went on before, other than a couple brief mentions of like, oh, there was an explosion at the steelworks, I think it was called, or whatever it was. But I don't know. In the book, you get these scenes, and the fire at the Black Spot is such a like crazy occurrence, and the axe murders, as I mentioned earlier. And I always miss that stuff, and I'm really hopeful that we'll get some of that. And I actually think we might, considering in the trailer we see like a different version of Pennywise where he doesn't have all the makeup on.
Yeah, I found that.
So I'm really curious to see if they're going to do something different with the origin here, and if it's going to be tied to that. It could be I think it was Mr. Gray. Bill Gray or something like that.
There was like a name, yeah, and he had passed away, or he took his name or something.
It's like, I think it is the woman who Beverly meets as an adult.
Yeah, that's what
is telling the story of her father. And obviously that scene is in the new one that's in the trailer. So I'm curious if they're going to touch on that and maybe try and expand on what that means and who this Mr. Gray was.
So I'm assuming when I finish all of our episodes, I'll remember more, but just remind me what his like potential origin was, something to do with like he was a clown in the town or something like that. And then like
I always got the impression that it was, because we see in the smoke hole scene, which is omitted from every adaptation we've seen so far, but the smoke hole vision, where they're transported back in time when we see the arrival of it as like a comet crashing to Earth.
Yeah.
So we know it's been around a long, long time. But I always got the impression that maybe the sort of imprint of the clown came from this. I think Bob Gray is actually the name of Bob Gray character. I have a feeling that Bob Gray was a clown that got sort of like imprinted onto Pennywise in some way, or Pennywise chose that, like, really liked that form and found it effective. What the story behind Bob Gray is, I don't think has ever really been told. And so I'm curious to see if it will be. I also heard a rumor, and we need to do some more research on this, but potentially there has been additional scenes written for It Chapter 2 by Stephen King that was not in the original novel.
Wow, that would be cool.
That he's gone back and maybe added some. And I wonder if some of the stuff he might have added would be sort of this like history of Pennywise kind of stuff, or an additional ending scene. I don't know. I'm very curious to see.
With Stephen King's involvement, and with the kind of this like craze that we're seeing right now with Stephen King material, I'm wondering if we can talk about this more after we see the second part of the new series, the new Andy Muschietti films. But
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we see like them start to try to do like a combined universe, and like Andy Muschietti like produces on some other director's film as they kind of start to build out the universe and connect things.
And further on this year, we're going to be covering Dr. Sleep. And that would be something, if there was some sort of connection between these two movies, that would be really exciting.
Now, the thing that I'm going to look into before our next episode is what studios own the rights to what stories, because that's the main thing that would prevent them from being able to create like kind of the macroverse that they would want to, is that I'm sure that they're owned by all kinds of different studios.
What would that be? The SKEU? The SK Extended Universe?
Yeah.
I don't know.
SKU. I don't even like EU. Drop the
SKU.
SKU. SKU.
Yeah, I don't know. That's definitely something we should keep an eye out for, because I mean, King does it in his books, and that's something we're aware of, and we're starting to pick up on a little bit with the stuff we've covered so far. And
I'm not necessarily saying that like I co-sign that, and I'm like really into like a SKU like whole like spin-off. They're trying to do a Marvel Cinematic Universe thing. I think they could do it, and it could be really cool. But there's also something at the same time where I like the idea of them being like I hate the idea of them having to like thread things in, change the artist's intention just to to make the movies fit and line up together and everything. As effectively as I feel like the MCU has done it, I think it's just like you can really get what the artist intends from the director, whoever, from their individual standalone film.
And honestly, I think it's also. But on the other hand, this is It Chapter 1, the highest grossing rated R film of all time, I believe, when it came out, right? And this potentially has the chance to top it with Chapter 2. And so clearly, Muschietti has touched on something that really works. And you're gonna, as a studio, green light another project and try and capitalize and go like, oh, you liked this Stephen King adaptation he did? And as long as he's game, they're going to want him to do more. And I think I believe there might even be some talks of that where he's going to direct some more stuff. I don't remember off the top of my head, but
yeah, I want to say that I read a report recently that he's producing on another Stephen King project. So he may be like kind of helping shepherd that.
And he's got to, and he's going to continue to do that. And I think that in some ways, it's like you can look at it and say like, oh, that's just Hollywood being Hollywood. But like in other ways, it's smart. It's like clearly he's got something figured out that works.
Right.
And so why not lean on that?
Yeah. I mean, if it turns into as well handled as something like the MCU, of course I'm excited to see a Stephen King universe all combined, and maybe eventually we could get Dark Tower to explain everything, and
Yeah.
But then again, like I don't know, I'm back and forth because I do like
Dark Tower series is happening. We talked about the
right.
TV series,
so. But I just wonder if it'll be connected. Yeah. But I also by the same thing, I also like the idea. I don't want to be like, this is Pennywise and this is where it comes from and this is The Shining and this is exactly why this happened. Like I think some of this stuff with the mystery kind of like helps my appreciation for these projects and things like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes knowing too much can kind of make you feel like, oh, I like the mystery.
Sure. Well, is there anything else? Let's refocus on the miniseries before we leave it behind completely for Chapter 2. Do you have any other points you wanted to touch on? Any other observations about this classic miniseries before we move on?
Most of it is just that I don't think I'd ever seen it all the way through before. I know I'd seen parts here and there. I was surprised at how much I was invested, and I did enjoy it I think it is just because of the love for the source material and the nostalgia for the project at this point, how much it means to our podcast, because of the beginning and how it's come all the way to this point. But I did enjoy it, and like I was interested in seeing this version of it. It was fun, with all the things, all the blemishes that we've talked about. It still was like an interesting and fun watch. However long it actually was, it was very long, is what I'm trying to say. But.
Yeah, it felt long, and because of, I think, the blemishes like we talked about. But yeah, I feel like I have a more complete understanding of the zeitgeist surrounding it, because this is such an important piece of it. And I had never seen it at all. I realized watching it, like the only thing I'd ever seen was like some of the GIFs of Pennywise. I'd probably seen some clips back in the day of Tim Curry as Pennywise, I should say. but I'd never watched the whole movie or the whole miniseries, and yeah, now I have, and so now I can appreciate that. And maybe I'll be able to appreciate if Andy Muschietti is doing any direct nods to the miniseries. Maybe we'll be able to pick up on that now. So
something else kind of just came to me that it may upset some people, but I think I'm saying this with good intentions, but another famous clown duo of people who were performers was Jack Nicholson as the Joker onto Heath Ledger as the Joker. And I think that like without Jack Nicholson's Joker, you don't get to Heath Ledger's Joker. And I think in the same way, Tim Curry was definitely like instrumental in us getting this Skarsgård representation of Pennywise.
That's a great point, and honestly, something we probably should have said earlier. I think you're right. You're right on with that. As much as we're appreciating the Skarsgård performance, Tim Curry has a lot to do with that, and because this was an iconic portrayal, and while you can say like, okay, but they're going back to the source material anyway, and they're Pennywise is in the book, and he is, but I think you have to nod to that and say, there's a definite connection there and a definite influence between those two versions. And yeah, I totally agree. I think it's important to recognize sort of the historical antecedent to the Skarsgård Pennywise.
Definitely.
All right, man. I think we should probably wrap it up about here. We want to go ahead and thank a brand new patron that we got, Teresa. Thank you for becoming a patron. We hope you enjoy our bonus content, which we just released another episode of recently, and that is an episode covering Jaws Part 2, which was a movie you had never seen. I got to revisit, and we got to talk about that on our bonus content. So if you'd like to check that out, go to patreon.com/inktofilm.
Connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at inktofilm. And make sure to join our Council of Inklings. We post polls in there and adaptation news and anything else that kind of seems like it's related to the podcast. So definitely join that and become a part of that community.
Yeah, and speaking of that, we haven't given this a shout out of late on the podcast, but I want to. Our Goodreads book club is actually been picking up some steam of late. We've got some more people posting on there. I created dedicated threads to each project, where people can go in and weigh in about, if you want to talk about sharp objects, you want to talk about good omens, any name it, any project that we've done, I created a thread for it, and we're starting to get some steam on there, so I'd like to see some other people join up. If you are a Goodreads member and you use Goodreads, it's easy. Just search for Inktofilm Book Club, and you'll find us, and you should absolutely join up.
If you'd like to help out the podcast without being a patron, you could leave a rating or review on iTunes or wherever else you listen. We've been getting some new reviews recently. I think we just got one. Which is really exciting, and we appreciate those because it does help to spread the word for the podcast. Yeah,
every little bit helps. Also, just telling a friend, telling someone you know that reads, if you think might be interested in this, or even someone you know who just likes watching movies and maybe could be curious about what goes on with the books that they're being adapted from. Let them know. We also wanted to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music, and Jennifer Delazana for providing our transcripts.
All right, well, this has been really fun, man. I can't believe we're in the middle of this nostalgic journey right now, and
I think we've set the stage for our dancing clown moment we're gonna have next week.
I can't wait, man. I cannot wait to see this movie, and with hopefully everybody's homes are okay with this hurricane and everything. But with the looming hurricane and the movie coming out and all the creepiness I've kind of explained that's associated with this at this point, I am excited to go see this movie and like experience it and really dive in.
Here we are at the end of the episode. Do you want to give us a Pennywise impression? A Tim Curry Pennywise impression?
Oh, man.
No one's listening at this point. They've all checked out.
I don't even know if I can remember a specific line that I would like to deliver. I do want to mention, as I give this impression, I like the interesting, like the difference in inflection to the You'll Float Too stuff. So yes, Georgie, down here, you'll float too.
And he kind of rides these like, you'll float.
Yeah.
One time, like, I don't know. It's funny. All right. There it is. We shouldn't quit our day jobs. But until next time.
Thanks for listening.